Hello and welcome. You are listening to Pint Size Therapy, where we explore all things related to mental health healing, personal growth and development, emotional wellness, and the human experience in pint-sized bites. I am your host, Dr. Aletha Clark, a licensed psychotherapist, certified hypnotherapist, and master addiction counselor, and I am happy to have you here with me today as you embark on your mental wellness journey. While I appreciate you tuning in, don't forget this podcast is informational only and is not a substitute for seeking out your own mental health counseling with a licensed professional. So join me as we jump into today's episode. Hello, and thank you for joining me for today's episode of Pint Size Therapy. Today we're going to continue our conversation from last time about turning red flags pink. If you remember from our last time together, we defined turning red flags pink as what happens when we try to downplay, justify, excuse, or flat out ignore signs that something in a relationship or a situation feels off. It's when we ignore our gut instinct. We ignore the alarm bells going off inside of us and try to convince ourselves that it's not that bad, that we're overreacting, or that things will change with time, patience, or love. In part 2 of this conversation, we'll dive into common red flags to look out for, how these common red flags show up in different relationships, and how to protect ourselves by trusting our instincts. So let's get started. So get really clear on what common red flags actually look like in everyday life, because they're not always as obvious as we expect. Red flags aren't just about dramatic, toxic blowups. Sometimes they're quiet, subtle patterns that chip away at your well-being over time. Red flags can be any personality characteristics, behaviors, habits, or core values that make the alarm bells go off in your gut, and the red flags pop up in your head. They often make you feel uncomfortable, doubtful, or less confident about yourself. And as I go through some of these common red flags, think about whether any of these have shown up in your life, in any relationship, past or present. So first up, let's talk about dishonesty. If someone is consistently lying, even about small things, that's a huge red flag. We understand that lying is toxic. We understand that lying is not healthy for a relationship. But sometimes it's even the small lies that add up to be huge red flags. Even lying by omission or misrepresentation. It's not just about what they're lying about, it's about the pattern of deception. Next is defensiveness. When someone can't take responsibility for their actions or always shift the blame to others, that's a sign that healthy communication might be a struggle. It's a sign that they are not willing to self-evaluate and reflect on themselves in areas that may need to work on or improve. If someone consistently criticizes or corrects you in front of other people, whether it's family, friends, or strangers, that's a red flag, especially if it's done in a condescending or passive-aggressive way. It could sound like, well, they're always so emotional, don't mind them. Or, they never know what they're doing. They'll lose their head if it wasn't attached. These comments may be disguised as teasing, but if they embarrass you, undermine your intelligence, or make others uncomfortable, it's not harmless. It's an attempt to assert power, often by making you feel smaller. Similar to criticism is the just joking red flag. These are comments that sting, but when you react, the other person says things such as, oh, relax, it was just a joke. But remember, jokes that make you the punchline, especially when they target your insecurities, aren't funny. They're a socially acceptable form of emotional invalidation. And this is a red flag. Relationships should be a space that is safe to land. So if you notice that someone consistently avoids, minimizes, or deflects your emotional needs, that's a pretty big deal. You might hear things like, why are you making a big deal out of this? You're too sensitive. That's not really important. Just get over it. When your emotions are dismissed, it trains you to stop sharing. And that turns connection into isolation. Emotional support isn't optional, it's foundational in any type of relationship. So while a little jealousy might seem, for example, flattering early on, it becomes a red flag when it turns into suspicion, accusation, or restriction. For example, they get upset when you spend time with others. They question your loyalty over harmless interactions. They need constant reassurance. This isn't love, it's fear dressed up as intensity. It can quickly turn into controlling behavior. And speaking of control, obviously, this is a huge one. This is a huge red flag. Controlling behaviors often start pretty subtly. They want to help you dress differently. They question your spending. They want passwords for transparency. They guilt you out of spending time with your friends, even family. It might be presented as protection or care, but it's rooted in dominance. Healthy love doesn't require constant surveillance. What about if someone has explosive reactions like slamming doors, yelling, throwing things, or becoming physically intimidating during conflict? This is a red flag, period. Even if they never direct that anger toward you physically, the emotional climate becomes unstable. If they are getting in your face, trying to kind of intimidate you, right? Walking up on you when they're upset, you might start feeling like you're walking on eggshells to avoid triggering them. And that's not safe. That's not sustainable. And that's not your responsibility. If someone doesn't respect your boundaries or opinions or space or voice, that's a deal breaking red flag. Respect isn't just about being nice, it's about listening. It's about honoring your individuality, your opinions. It's not trying to override your autonomy. Disregarding your no, even in small ways, is a sign of deeper disregard to come. We also have things such as lack of empathy, addiction issues, an inability to apologize, holding double standards, and even secretive behavior. All of these red flags suggest an imbalance in the relationship, where one person may be prioritizing their needs or manipulating the situation at the expense of the other person's well being. Gaslighting is another red flag in a relationship. When a person purposely tries to sow self doubt, confusion, make you second guess yourself, this shows up when a person changes information they originally told you, projecting their shortcomings onto you, outright lying or denying, making you feel like you're losing it. As a reminder from the first part of this conversation, red flags aren't just limited to romantic relationships. They can show up in friendships, work situations, family dynamics, and even within ourselves when we're ignoring our own boundaries or needs. So red flags in friendships can be if you notice a friend who constantly belittles your achievements or dismisses them, making backhanded compliments or subtle digs, or always makes the conversation about them. It might show jealousy or an inability to support the success. Another red flag in friendships is when the relationship feels one sided. If you're always the one reaching out, always the one offering support or making plans, over time, this can leave you feeling drained and unappreciated. A healthy friendship should involve mutual effort, mutual respect, and care. Workplaces are a breeding ground for red flags, but we often dismiss them, thinking we just need to get through it or that work is supposed to be stressful. A common work related red flag is when a boss or coworker consistently takes credit for your ideas or doesn't respect your boundaries, such as contacting you outside of work hours without regard for your personal time. Another one is when there is an unhealthy work culture that promotes constant competition or gossip, It encourages belittling and disrespectful talk, anger outbursts, or favoritism. If you find yourself walking on eggshells, fearing how your boss or coworkers will react, that's a clear signal something is wrong. Or, how about when your manager emails you at 9 p.m. and expects a reply? You've mentioned needing downtime for your family, but they keep pushing. You're burnt out. You think they're probably just stressed too. I don't want to seem ungrateful. I'll just respond real quick. Here, the red flag is being ignored again, converted into pink by fear of being perceived as lazy, or difficult, or even the fear of something if you don't actually respond, such as retaliation. Family relationships are deeply ingrained, so it can be even harder to recognize red flags. One major red flag is when family members routinely cross boundaries, whether that's by meddling in your personal life, being overly critical, or refusing to respect your decisions as an adult. And another is emotional manipulation. This can look like, guilt tripping, where a family member makes you feel bad for not doing something they want, or using passive aggressive tactics to maintain control. It's tough because we're often taught to tolerate these behaviors in families, but there's still red flags that need to be addressed for your emotional well being. Perhaps one of the hardest places to spot red flags is within ourselves. One example is when we consistently ignore our own needs or allow others to overstep our boundaries without saying anything. You say yes to every request, even when you're drowning because you don't want to let anyone down. If you find yourself always putting others first to the point where you're burning out, that's a red flag that you may not be practicing self-care or setting healthy limits. The red flag is waving, but you're busy silencing it because you are too focused on people pleasing. If you're consistently silenced, your discomfort or, avoiding setting boundaries because you fear being seen as too much, difficult, or selfish, that's a red flag. It's a sign you're abandoning your own needs for the comfort of others. That's self-neglect. It's disguised as selflessness. Another red flag within ourselves is when we notice patterns of self-sabotage, like procrastination, staying in unhealthy situations, using negative self-talk. It's crucial to acknowledge these behaviors and reflect on why we might be allowing them to continue. And here's another point. Another powerful way to know when something isn't right, when you are turning a red flag pink, if you don't feel safe telling your closest friends or loved ones about what's happening in a relationship or situation, you need to pay attention to that. This is a major red flag. Maybe you've told yourself they wouldn't understand or they'll judge me, so you stay silent. You downplay the story, you defend the person, you don't tell the whole truth or you embellish the truth. Or even worse, you just stay silent altogether and don't share. But it is at that point that your silence is actually speaking. Sometimes we don't tell the truth out loud because deep down we already know what that truth means, and we're not ready to act on it. But hiding red flags from people who care about us is usually a sign that we're also hiding them from ourselves. If any of these patterns kind of sound familiar, don't ignore them. Don't justify, minimize, or turn them pink. These are not just personality quirks. These are emotional safety issues. The earlier you identified red flags, the easier it is to respond with clarity instead of confusion, and with boundaries instead of self-betrayal. I want to pause for a moment here. I want to give you a chance to reflect. I want you to take a deep breath. And if you can, I want you to grab a journal or just sit quietly and think through these questions. Where in your life right now might you be turning red flags pink? What have you been excusing, minimizing, rationalizing, out of love, out of fear, out of guilt, out of habit? What does your gut say about that situation, even if your mind is trying to explain it away? What boundary have you hesitated to hold because you didn't want to lose someone or disappoint them? If you're struggling with this, you're not alone. These questions can stir up a lot in us, but your answers matter. Your discomfort is actually data, so don't ignore it. Just take the first step in acknowledging it. Now that we have taken some time to reflect and identify how red flags show up and what to look out for, the next question is, what can you do when you start to notice these red flags? First, listen to your gut. Like we discussed in part 1 of this podcast, your body often knows when something is wrong before your mind has fully processed it. That uneasy feeling, the tightness in your chest, the anxiety, the thoughts that won't go away, those are signs that you need to pay attention to. This recognition is the first step to change, because you can't change what you refuse to see. But it doesn't stop here. Second, we want to stop ignoring those red flags. We want to stop turning them pink. When something feels off, take the time to recognize it, observe it, address it right away. Pushing it under the rug will only lead to more problems down the road. But as you are addressing the red flag, make sure you are taking notice of how that person is responding to you. Are they becoming angry or defensive? Are they dismissing or minimizing what you're saying? Are they trying to argue and justify their actions? These reactions in and of themselves are red flags and should not be ignored. Another key point is to pay attention to what a person does, not just what they say. Actions and words need to align for trust to be built. If someone is telling you what you want to hear, but their actions don't match up, that's a red flag. Also, in all areas of your life, whether with a partner, a friend, family member, or even at work, establish your boundaries and stick to them. Boundaries don't always mean cutting someone off immediately. Start small. Say no when you usually say yes. Pay attention to their reaction. Respectful people respect boundaries. Controlling or manipulative people resist them. If something crosses your line of comfort or safety, it's up to you to protect yourself. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for maintaining your boundaries. And lastly, an often overlooked part of this conversation is being willing to recognize red flags within ourselves. Yes, this work isn't just about calling out others. It's about turning the mirror toward ourselves with honesty and compassion. So how do you actually recognize and address red flags that are present within ourselves? Start with your body. What sensations come up when you're around a certain person or in a certain situation? Your body often signals danger or discomfort long before your mind gives you permission to name it. Don't dismiss it. Talk to your trusted friend, a therapist, or a support person. If you feel shame or embarrassment sharing the full story, ask yourself, what am I protecting? Them or myself from the truth? Speaking the truth out loud is a powerful first step to reclaiming clarity. If you notice red flags in your own behavior, avoidance, self-abandonment, over-apologizing, people-pleasing, don't shame yourself. Ask, what am I afraid will happen if I choose myself in this moment? Then gently practice showing up differently. Progress is the goal, not perfection. Instead of just watching for who makes you feel uneasy, also look for what patterns keep showing up in your relationships. Are you always over-functioning in relationships? Choosing people who need fixing? Avoiding conflict to keep the peace? The pattern is the red flag, and awareness is your first layer of protection. Protecting yourself isn't just about calling others out. It's about calling yourself back to your truth, back to your peace, learning to trust your instincts again. And remember, if you're hesitant to share what's going on with someone who truly loves you, ask yourself why. Because sometimes our silence says everything we're afraid to admit. So, as we wrap up part 2 of this 2-part conversation, I want to leave you with this thought. You don't have to stay in this pattern of turning red flags pink. You can learn to trust your gut again. You can name the red flags for what they are. You can protect your peace even when it's uncomfortable. You can build relationships rooted in mutual respect, emotional safety, and truth. Trust your instincts. Red flags are not to be ignored, but must be acted on. Red flags are relationship deal breakers. They no matter how much you turn them pink, they will always reappear and be an issue in your relationship. It's better to address the issue early on than to let it grow into something you can't control. If you have fallen into the habit of turning red flags pink, I empower you to retrain your instincts, rebuild trust with yourself, and start honoring what your body, your spirit, and your emotions are telling you. You just have to be willing to call a red flag what it is, red, not pink. I thank you for joining me today. And remember, protect your peace, trust your gut, and don't settle for turning red flags pink. As always, thank you for joining me today on Pint-Sized Therapy. If you found this conversation meaningful, I invite you to leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and share with your family and friends. Come visit my website at pintsizedtherapy.com and my Etsy shop at pintsizedtherapy.etsy.com, where you will find resources to accompany our various discussions and encourage you to continue your wellness journey. Once again, I am Dr. Aletha Clark. Until next time, remember to protect your peace and take care of your mental health.